Well, thank you for joining us in our Shepherd's Bookshelf. This is our first podcast for the new year, 2025, and I thought we'd kind of break with what we've been doing. We've been looking at some heavy theology and some practical stuff. I want to go to fiction. We won't do the fiction very often, probably, but fiction, good fiction, is valuable. The best readers, the best thinkers, the best writers will recommend that you read a lot if you're going to be a good writer, a good thinker, and that you read fiction. And why would they recommend fiction? Because after all, fiction is fiction. It's make-believe. But the reason why they recommend that is that they're good writers, whether they be popular mystery writers or science fiction or whatever. The best writers know how to draw people in, how to not only reach their minds and thinking, but to stir up the emotions and get people to listen and drawn into the book. Why would people read a 1,000-page novel? That I see people doing that all the time on planes and so forth, books I'm not interested in. Why would people do that? Because the writers of fiction know how to write. And we can learn a great deal about communication, especially if we have any opportunity to communicate as a teacher, a preacher, a writer, whatever. If we have any of those opportunities, we can learn a great deal about how to do that by going to the best of fiction. So I like some of the classics of the past. We might hit a few of those later on. And the best fiction makes you think. It not only tells a story that gravitates our thinking to a thought or two or our excitement or whatever. It also gets us to think about the realities of life and how we should function, maybe sometimes even changes our whole philosophy of thinking about certain things. That's good fiction. Well, the one fiction series and writer that has been indexed by a lot of Christians today, people read her books quite a bit. She is not, this is a book, won the Pulitzer Prize called Gilead, and it's written by Marilynne Robinson. She has written a number of books, 4 in this particular series, starting with this one. This is the book I find most often referenced by Christian authors today. If they're talking about good fiction, or they're quoting something, or whatever, they're going to her. Now, I'm not sure where she really is spiritually speaking. She talks. The book actually is wrapped around a family, a guy named John Ames, who is a older pastor. He's dying of heart disease, and this is wrapped around his story and his life. And so she knows a lot about certain theological things, but she never really lights exactly where she is. So we'll leave that at that. But her thoughts are very interesting. John Ames is a pastor in the mid-50s in a fictional town called Gilead, and this is in Iowa. And John is a man who had a wife and a child who died in childbirth, and then he didn't marry again until much later in life. But at age 67, a much younger lady walked into a service where he was preaching, and one thing led to the other, and before you knew it, they were married. And then they had a child, and this child is a heart of the story in the sense that John now is 76 years old. He is very sick, and he is nearing death. He knows he doesn't have much time. He knows his little boy that he really loves so deeply will never get to know him in his adulthood. And so he's writing his memoirs, so to speak, but these aren't this is not just a diary. Pastor Ames is talking about his life and why he lives and what's important to him. And so as he writes to his son, he's trying to let him know of the important things of life, and for his son to know something about him after he is gone. He wants to be remembered in that way. So as he goes through the book here, we find that his whole life has been wrapped around ministry. He's been pastoring in the same town all of his life. He's written about 2,500 sermons, he suspects, but he wants them all burned after he's gone, except for maybe just a few special ones. His story is interwoven with a number of characters. His wife, that we'll get to a little later, is much younger, very different. Her very questionable whether she is a Christian or not, or even claims to be a Christian. And their marriage is one of convenience and comfort. Pastor Ames loves her. She takes good care of him, and that might be as far as most of that goes. But he also has a good friend named Bronham, and Bronham is a pastor of another church in the little town, and has been his lifetime friend. And Bronham is also dying, and he's a little bit younger than John Ames, but he's dying, and he's further along in his death process, and that's part of his heart is his relationship with his friend. But the real issue is Bronham's son Jack. Jack is a prodigal son. He was raised in a Christian home, rebelled against all those things, walked away from the family and everybody else for 20 years. And then he came home. And now he's come home and nobody's real sure why he's there. He doesn't seem to know why he's there either. He is aimless. He's struggling. And yet he comes over to see John Ames and his family on a regular basis. And that is bittersweet because this boy has caused a lot of pain in the family. And John loves Bronham's family, and he hurts for him. And this boy has been very difficult. On top of that, as a much younger man, he is coming over and seems to be making some inroads into fellowship with Pastor Ames' wife, and playing ball and stuff with his son that Ames cannot personally do at his age and health. He's a little bit jealous about that. He's not sure about Jack's desires here and his motivations for being there. So on top of him being a prodigal who has caused great harm to his friend, he may be moving in on his wife, and after he's gone, may perhaps marry his wife, which he would not want him to do. So there's a lot of backstory in that as well. Jack, as we move on with this story, though, we're going to leave it off a little bit. I want to read a little bit toward the end of the book to give you a flavor of the kind of prose that we're looking at here. He's writing toward the end of the book, and he's saying things like this. He says, these little towns were once the bold ramparts meant to be sheltered just such peace. He said, old Bronham's family have gathered, except the one his heart yearns for. That's Jack. Jack is left. And left behind once again, virtually without saying goodbye, his family. They pay their respects and invite us for dinner, but these days we three love to be at home. Then he says this is why we have lived this life. There are thousands reasons to live this life, every one of them sufficient. Later on, a page over, he says, so I said to him, he goes to Bronham's house. Bronham's in bed. Bronham is pretty much comatose, but he goes to his house. He has just sent Jack off on the train, prayed with him, blessed him. He's come back to tell Bronham what happened at that incident. He said, so I said to him in his sleep, as he sits beside his friend's bedside who is dying, he said, I bless that boy of yours for you. I still feel the weight of his brow upon my hand. I said, I love him as much as you meant me to. So certain of your prayers are finally answered, old fella. And mine too. We had to wait a long time, didn't we? A little later in the book, he says this, there are two occasions when the sacred beauty of creation becomes dazzling apparent, and they occur together. One is when we feel our mortal insufficiency to the world, and the other is when we feel the world's mortal insufficiency to us. Augustine said the Lord loves each of us as an only child, and that is true. He's speaking still, thinking of Jack and Bronham. And then he moves on down in his book to the final lines. He says, but hope deferred is still hope. And he's talking again of Jack and Bronham and life. Hope deferred is still hope. I love this town. I think sometimes of going into the ground here as a last wild gesture of love. I too will smolder away the time until the great and general incandescence. I'll pray for you to grow up, he says to his son, as a brave man in a brave country. I will pray you find a very way to be useful. And I'll pray, and then I'll sleep. I think it's beautiful prose. This book that won the Pulitzer Prize then was followed up by 3 more books that I'll mention quickly. These characters are given more life and more background in these books. Here's the next one, written by Robinson. It's called Home, and this is the story of Jack and why Jack is what he is. It's his backstory. We find Jack just seemingly unable to get traction in life. He's been gone 20 years. He's an alcoholic when he comes home. As he comes home, he's trying to make amends with his father and his sister, Gloria, who's back in the home taking care of Bronte, although she herself is going through great heartache with a divorce. It's about sin. It's about forgiveness. It's about a prodigal who's returned home but simply does not know what to do. His spirit is broken, and he's a wandering prodigal even after he comes back. And that story continues for Jack at this time. And then she writes another one just simply called Jack. And we get a deeper backstory into Jack's life as we find that he has gone off for a long period of time, and the things he did for those 20 years, including getting married apparently to a black young lady who is a pastor's daughter as well. The backgrounds are very different. This is the mid-50s, and the cultural idea of a black man, woman and a black man marrying was certainly not accepted, especially in these smaller areas where they were living. And so it was a very difficult thing. Her family did not want this relationship, and yet he kept barging in until he finally married Della, but it didn't go well. And she's gone. She's left him, and he is trying to find her, trying to get back with her. So his life intersects with this very strange romance that just brings out the hurt and the pain that's in this poor guy's life as he struggles with life. And then we have a final one, and this is called Lilla. Lilla is the name of the wife of John Ames. She's a strange character. She has lived a very difficult life. She grew up basically in the streets, taken in by a very unusual woman, a very rough, very hard life she was raised. So she had a lot of baggage, a lot of background. That life has fallen apart. She's basically homeless. She's living on her own. And when she walks into the church one day to hear a sermon, or to get out of the rain, I think it was, and heard the sermon, and that led eventually to a relationship with Pastor Ames and a marriage. But it's not this is not a Cinderella story. This is going into the background of this lady who now is living a very different life, a totally different life, a life of a Christian versus a life of a person on the street who has abandoned all things spiritual. And with that in mind, we see that she is torn. She doesn't really know what's best for her. She doesn't really know what she should do in a lot of circumstances. And it's a bittersweet story. John Ames loves her with all of his heart, but he is so much older than her, it's hard to relate. And she takes good care of him, and she is there for him. And yet, once again, he's much older man, and now she has a child. And so this story gets very involved. But as these sound kind of like downer stories, these are difficult stories. Robinson is dealing with real life, with real people, and how life isn't like a Hallmark movie. Life is tough, and people go through these various issues. She's dealing with life and how people think and how people process. And so that's why her books are winning awards all over the country. This is Oprah's Book of the Club of the Year, book 2021. So we see that people from Christian backgrounds as well as secular backgrounds are gaining something from the insights of this woman's fictional literature. So if you're looking for something to read that's fictional, rather than reading the latest murder mystery, I would encourage you to start with Gilead and see what you think. See if you can slowly get some insights into this woman's writing as she deals with a life, end of a life, and how all of us must process the end of life and what we want to leave behind, what legacy we want to give, what we want our children to know and to remember, all these things. So I encourage you, if you want to read some fiction, and I would encourage you doing some fiction reading this year. This will be a really good place to start. So I hope this is helpful, and we'll pick up on something different next time.